We are in week 3 of our series called Excuses. I've really enjoyed this series. It's one of my favorite topics. And we've been talking about the 12 steps. And if you've missed the first 2 weeks of this series, it's going to feel like you're coming in the middle of a movie because you're really kind of in the middle of a series. We're going through the 12 steps, and we've already gone through steps 1 through 7. And the 12 steps are not just for addicts and alcoholics. They are used in AA, but they are really the message of Jesus broken down into 12 steps. And that's what I love, is like people are like, well, how do I follow God? I mean, what does Christianity really look like? Well, the 12 steps are actually a systematic process for following Jesus. So those first 2 talks are online at www.first.church. So you can check those out after this service. If you're watching online, go ahead and stop that video and go to week 1 and week 2 of Excuses. Now, I'm excited about today. And the last 2 weeks, we've been working our steps. I just want to review them quickly with you. In week 1, the first step, we admitted that we were powerless over our addictions, compulsive behaviors, and sin. And our lives have become unmanageable. We're powerless. Our lives are unmanageable because of sin, right? Number 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That power is Jesus. And that's awesome. That was a great step. And then step number 3, we made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. And I want to make it clear, you cannot be a Christian until you go through these steps. And you might not have done it formally with these steps. But if you are a Christian, you've gone through something like this, a belief process, a cognitive process that involves these 3 steps. This is how you become a Christian. You realize, man, I don't have control over my sin. Jesus can restore me. I'm turning my will and my life over to Jesus. That's how that works, right? That was week 1. Week 2 of this series, we talked about anchors, right? And we had that cross, and I was dragging those anchors attached to my belt around stage. And we said we made a searching and fearless inventory of ourselves. And it's been a joy to talk with many of you this week who have shared with me, yeah, hey, I did that, and it was really freeing. It was awesome. It was a great process. But we made lists of our guilt, fear, bitterness, and sexual misconduct. Those were the 4 anchors. And once you make that list, we admitted to God, ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Their job is to show you how that unforgiveness, how that issue, how that anchor is connected to you. They show you the carabiner, right? They say, this is your role. And then you own that role. We were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. You make sure that you got it all, and finally, you humbly ask Him to remove all these shortcomings. We hang them on the cross. And that was a good process. I hope that you work that process. This week is about actually investing in our life change, okay? This is where behavior modification actually happens. If you are a Christian, but you're like, man, I keep struggling with the same sins in my life, that's what this week is all about. It's about helping you overcome that. Confessing that list to somebody, asking God to remove it, that's great. That's good, okay? Believing that Jesus can restore us, turning our will and life over to Him, that's good. Here's the thing, it's all free. It's all free. And free is not bad. Free is good. We're a lot of Dutch people here. We know we love free, right? But free is not that valuable to the person receiving the gift when something's free, because it didn't cost us anything. That's why it's free. It's the definition of free. This week is all about buy-in. It's all about buy-in. You ever noticed when you're not paying for something, you don't take it as seriously? Like, you always order water at the restaurant until you get a gift card, and you're like, hello, I'm going to get a soda, right? It's just me. But a lot of churches I've worked at, we've done a class called Financial Peace University. We're doing it at this church right now. There's about 50 people going through that class. It's really good. It's about godly plans for finances. And a lot of people come to me and they say, hey, Pastor, my finances are a wreck. I need to take Financial Peace University, but I can't afford to do it because my finances are a wreck. Right? It's like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. So the first time we offered this class, I said, hey, you know what? We'll find some funds. We'll come together. We'll sponsor you. So we sponsored a ton of people. We just gave them a scholarship. They got a free ride. We paid for it. It was expensive, but we did it because Dave Ramsey's a total capitalist. He does charge quite a bit for it. But anyway, we did it. And what was amazing is there were 12 people that got scholarships, 100% scholarships. And all 12 did not finish the class. You know why? Because it was free. It was free to them. They didn't have any buy-in, right? They didn't invest in it. It's easy to receive a gift and not take it very seriously if it didn't cost you anything. What's interesting is today, I still scholarship people on FPU, but we will pay for a part of it. We won't pay for the whole thing. I found that when people even just pay for a quarter of their class, they take it much more seriously because they're invested in it, right? I find this with healthcare. Okay, I definitely find this with healthcare. You ever notice when you meet your deductible, you're like, make it rain, yes, we hit our deductible, I've got an earache, a backache, I'm going, right? My wife is pregnant with our 4th kid, and I wanted 2, she wanted 6. To steal Karen Boer's line, I got what I wanted twice, and she says she never got what she wanted, right? But seriously, if she wants another kid, it's going to be with her next husband, because I'm done. So I scheduled a procedure the other day. I called and I said, hey, we're at our deductible. I want to get it in this calendar year. I want to make a procedure that's going to stop kids from happening. And I want the closest, fastest, cheapest place. And, I'm talking with the person, and they're like, well, here are all the details of how that works. And I'm like, whoa, let me stop you right there. I don't care about the details. What I want is the end result. Don't tell me anything, okay? I want the most convenient, fastest, easiest, cheapest place. That's all I care about, okay? Well, then I found out my insurance doesn't cover it. Well, now I've got some treasure in the game, okay? Now I've got some real investment in this. All of a sudden, I care. So I spent an hour and a half on the phone trying to figure out how much it costs to get this procedure. No one could tell me. It turns out to get this procedure, you have to get a billing code from the nurses, from the medical instrument supplier, a facility fee, a doctor fee, and those were all the people that I could figure out were involved. But there might be more. I don't know. All of them had to give me a secret code that I then had to give to my insurer to figure out what their negotiated rate was. I'm a smart guy. I'm pretty relentless. But to figure out what that cost, it was, and listen, when it was all said and done, it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money, okay? All of a sudden, I went from not caring at all, I didn't care at all, to now I care deeply because I'm investing so much money. There's a Bible verse that talks about this. It says, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. If you don't put treasure in something, you're not going to care very much about it. But when you put treasure in something, all of a sudden, you care a lot more about it. I didn't care about this procedure because I didn't have any treasure in the game. But all of a sudden, I made an investment in it. And I was like, I care deeply. I mean, I want to know how it works. I want to know who's doing it. They actually sell DIY kits online that I looked into getting, but I'm not, no. Okay, I've elected not to. I went from not caring to caring deeply because all of a sudden I had treasure in it. This is how people are with Jesus in the 12 steps. You see, so often people get through step 7 and they're like, oh, that's great. I've received so much from Jesus. But we don't really take it seriously because we haven't invested in it. All the steps up till now, it's about Jesus' grace. We really did nothing to earn it. It was all his grace. We were powerless. He forgave us. He set us free. That's the first 7 steps. It is a gift from God, not by anything that we did. It is what he did. Steps 8 through 12 are all about personal investment. This is where your freedom from sin really starts to solidify in your life. This is where behavior modification actually occurs. Today, I'm going to teach you steps 8 and 9, and I'm not going to lie to you. These are more difficult than the first 7 steps because they require some real sacrifice on our part, some real investment on our part. They require us to involve other people, but they make our faith solidify. So if you want a strong, consistent faith, today is about giving you that. I'm going to go over steps 8 through 9 today. Okay, so it's really just 2 steps, and just so you can see the structure, if you're like me, you need to know what's going to happen. 2 steps, each step has 3 subpoints. So step 8, 3 subpoints. Step 9, 3 subpoints. That's how it's going to work, okay? So just so you know, ready? Here we go. Step 8. It says, we made a list of all the persons we had harmed, and we became willing to make an amends to them all. This is a powerful step. We think about, okay, how has sin in my life, any kind of sin in general, how has it harmed people? Okay, and how can am I willing to go to that person and make it right? This is a powerful step, and it does 3 things. What it does is, number 1, it helps you count the cost. Helps you count the cost of sin. I think so often we don't really think about what sin costs us and costs others. This step is designed to help you quantify. This is the damage that sin has caused. Okay, step number 2, it helps you prepare for rebuilding in your future. Okay, and number 3, it helps you choose to be victorious instead of a victim. Let's start with counting the cost. I want to start by talking for a minute about counting the cost. I had dinner with a couple on Sunday night last week. They're new to our church. They both recently given their lives to Christ. They're new to following Jesus, which is really cool within the last few months. And they have young kids. And I was just talking with this guy, getting to know him. I was like, man, I really like him. And he started sharing with me, I have encountered a life-altering respiratory injury. And it was a pretty serious injury. Even simple tasks were really hard for him. He could remodel, like, say, a part of his house for one day, but then he would have to take several days off just to recover because his lungs were so damaged. And as we talked, it became clear that the injury he had was a direct result of a harmful substance, a material that he was required to use at work, okay, at his job. And because of this material, he had serious damage to his lungs. What was interesting is there were 34 others from this employment place that had the same injury. It's kind of like this new budding thing. I mean, it's a scandal. It's a hard part. And the really scary part is it turns out there are records the employer absolutely knew about the risks and the damage that this substance was causing to the employees at this workplace. Furthermore, his direct supervisor knew what was happening, understood the damages that it was causing to people, and he demanded that his employees continue to use this substance, even in spite of all of that, to their harm. Now that's like, oh man, that's evil. I think most of us, we think, man, that supervisor is evil. And the truth is, he is. I mean, that's messed up, right? I mean, it's super messed up. But I don't think he woke up saying, I can't wait to ruin people's lives this morning. I don't think that's what he did, okay? He was just focused on himself. And I would say he was addicted to himself, success and money. That's what he wanted. He never said, I want to hurt people. What he did say is, I will do whatever it takes to get what I want. That's where you really start to get into some costly places because you don't realize how you're hurting people. When you get hooked on something like that, you're going to hurt people. I mean, when you catch a fish, when you get a daredevil, and it hooks onto a fish's face, and you've got like 6 hooks in the fish's cheek, and it's really hooked, I mean, it'll start fighting on that line, swimming everywhere, spining people, spining its fish friends, spining its fishy houses, just knocking people over. It doesn't care. It's focused on one thing and one thing only, right? Getting free. That's all it cares. It's hooked. It's hooked. That's what's happening. And this is exactly what people do when we get hooked. We run into people, we ram into people, we're just focused on this one thing, and we don't care what happens to anybody or anything else in our life. We're hooked on this one thing, and if it hurts people, we don't care. We shout at people that we love, we blame everybody else, just like that guy's boss. We'll do things that will hurt people that we never thought we'd do. And this is exactly what people do when we get hooked. We do this all the time. We get into debt, but we keep spending because we've got a spending issue or a shopping addiction. We ruin relationships with a gossip addiction. We deal with this with a status addiction or a money addiction, food, pride, work, comparison addiction. We get addicted to kids' achievement or leaving our kids an inheritance, and all of a sudden, everything else, we just leave it behind. We begin hurting people, friends. We get addicted to jealousy or pornography or all these other things. We get hooked on these different sin issues, and we just begin hurting people. We don't even count the cost. We don't realize what we're doing. We just become a hurricane of destruction, only focused on ourselves, not caring about who or what is in our path. Last week, if you'll remember, I was dragging these anchors behind me on a belt. And what we learned as I was practicing this analogy, if I ran too fast on stage, these things, you can actually kind of see it right now, but they start spinning super fast like a hurricane. And they were actually like running into the lights and running into me and things. And it was like, oh man, I got to go slow because if I go fast, these will be destructive. And yet I think it's a great analogy because that is exactly what happens. When people are dragging anchors around, these anchors are spinning like a hurricane of destruction behind us, running into people, running into things, destroying stuff in our life. And we're just a path of destruction. You ever notice people are like that? Sometimes they're just like, ooh, being around that person hurts. They hurt people, they hurt things. See, this step is all about counting the cost of what sin has done in our lives. Jesus reminds us that sin is expensive. God paid a high price for you, so don't be enslaved by the world. Jesus reminds us, hey, I paid for you on the cross with my life. Sin is not inexpensive. It is expensive to deal with. And so often, I just don't think we count the cost of sin. But when we do understand it, we begin to take it more seriously. Taking our anchors away was not cheap. And I think one of the core mentalities I face in new Christians today, or people who have been Christians for a long time, is I love Jesus, I just don't really care that much about sin in my life. And it's fine, I'm pretty much a good person, and I know I do stuff that Jesus doesn't, say is the best, but I just don't care that much, right? And we forget that sin was expensive for Jesus to pay for. I mean, it was not cheap. This is because we've never counted the cost. But when we see the destruction that sin causes, not just in our life, but in the lives of people around us, we begin to realize, man, I don't want to live that way. And remember, sin is not just, sin because God's like, nah, I don't want you to do that. I don't like that. I don't like the way that tastes. That's not why sin is sin, okay? Sin actually harms our lives. Our Creator who made us, He loves us so much, He doesn't want us to make choices that are going to harm us. That's why He labels it sin, because He doesn't want us to do painful things that are going to hurt us. Just like my kids. I don't want my kids to stick their fingers in outlets. The other day I found Hermione with a clothespin inside of a power outlet. I said, hey, no. It's true. Daddy, look at this. She actually brought me over. Daddy, look at this. See, look what I put in there. I was like, it's happening. You're 4. Sin statistically brings pain, emotional trauma, and lack of human thriving. And that's why God says don't do it, because He loves us. This step is designed to help us count the cost of sin, okay? Helps us count the cost. The second thing this step does is it helps us prepare for rebuilding in our future. Last week, We're dealing with anchors of our past that we're dragging around. We had anchors that we were dragging around the stage. Last week was all about looking behind us and saying, hey, here are my blind spots. I need to deal with these. It's about dealing with mistakes in our past. This week is all about pivoting and preparing to rebuild our future. Okay? After a hurricane leaves, you have to assess the damage. We've had a lot of hurricanes recently. Our friends, Ken and Lois DeYoung, have a home in Florida, and Lois, she emphasized to me before service, Ken didn't even come, okay? Lois went down to Florida by herself to assess the damage of the hurricane, and she took some pictures of just some of the areas around her house, right? And, I mean, it was pretty severe. What she was doing was assessing the damage, okay? She's assessing the damage because when a hurricane of sin leaves, what are you going to do? The first thing you do is you begin to assess the damage because you can't rebuild until you understand what needs rebuilding. When you're walking out of sin, you need to take a moment to account for all that has happened and been destroyed. When you become a Christian, it means you are committing to begin rebuilding the life that sin has destroyed. And you can't begin effective repairs until you make a list. Just imagine a pile of destruction in your life, okay? There's a big pile. If you go in there with no plan, what you're going to do is you're going to just start throwing metal here and there, digging a hole over here, and then filling it back up again with stuff over here. And I've seen people who work like this. It's like, man, you're not making any progress because you're not counting the costs. You're not making a plan. If you're going to move forward in your life, you need to make a plan. You need to assess the damage. And that's what this step is doing. You're making a list of all the people that your sin has harmed so that you can assess the damage, right? That's what you're doing. Jesus tells us to do this. He goes, but don't begin until you count the cost. Okay? For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundations before running out of money. And then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, there's a person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. How many new Christians do we meet who have never counted the cost? And this is what makes Christianity a laughingstock, isn't it? I mean, people laugh at people who haven't counted, I'm a new creation, and then we never counted the cost. Making a list is like making a plan, making a survey of the destruction in our life, and preparing to rebuild it. And that's what I love about this step. We are preparing to move forward in our life. This is where discipleship, this is where forward progress, this is where growth really happens for Christians. So often people ask me, why does my life with Christ still have a lot of destruction? And I will tell you, it's because you probably haven't turned from the sin and begun rebuilding. I mean, following Jesus means turning from our sin, okay? This step is all about putting together a plan so you can do that. And I think one of the things that we often don't get is, and I talk about this all the time, but I think it's such an important concept, okay? Especially young people today. If there's one part of the message that you get, I want you to listen up right here. Okay? Our lives are so fragmented today. We have all these different compartments of our life, and they're usually just kind of disorganized. But our time, we've got our sex life, our work life, our romance life, our social media life, our internet life, our friends, our home life, our church life. They're all different places. Okay? And what happens is we give our life to Jesus in our church life. Okay, and we're like, I love Jesus. I'm on the Bible app every day, reading Next Steps and Morning by Morning and Oswald Chambers, and it's awesome. You know, I love it. It's great. But here's the thing. So much of our other life, we've never actually assessed what is apart from God in those areas. So here's what we do. Here's what we do in this step. We make this list. We assess the damage. It kind of looks like this. We organize all this, and we ask ourselves 3 questions in each area. Number 1, how have I been living apart from God's plan in each area of my life, right? So we start off like social media. I've been living apart from God's plan by ranting on, people all the time. Like just getting angry on Demont Unofficial and Original. I just rant all the time, right? Okay, so I've been living, or my sex life, right? Maybe you're living with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You're not married yet. You're just living apart from God's plan. You say, how have I been living apart from God's plan in each area? Number 2, how has my sin hurt myself and others? This is a critical question that we rarely ask ourselves. We say, I know I'm living outside of God's plan in this area, but we never actually think, what is this costing me? Right? For example, if you're living with your boyfriend or girlfriend, you're not married yet. Like God says, hey, that's not right, that's not my best, and that's like laughable in our society today. And yet we know that statistically, cohabiting before you're married dramatically increases probability of divorce and increases dysfunction in that relationship. So not only are you penalizing yourself, but you are harming the person that you are with by making that decision. Right? That's true. That's real. And we never count the cost. That's what this step is about, right? That's what we do. And then step number 3 is, what do I need to change to bring God's best for me in each area of my life? And this is hard, okay? Because we count the cost, we say it's bad. But then this is where we say, I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to make some changes in my life. I need to change the way that I've been operating. This is powerful. See, this is something that I think as Christians we need to be doing, and that's what this step is designed to help you do. We make a list of all the people that our sin has harmed, and we become willing to make it right with them. We say, what do I need to change in order to bring God's best into every area of my life? All right? Last week we dealt with the past. This week is about preparing to rebuild for our future. And when you have done these first two things, you count the cost, okay? And then you assess in these areas, you get ready to rebuild for the future. What it does is it moves you from being a victim into victory. This is a huge deal. See, being a victim is a really comfortable place. It's easy and it's noble to forgive people who have wronged you. I mean, relatively speaking. Last week, we dealt with the anchor of bitterness and unforgiveness, and it's easy just to think, man, they wronged me, but I'm going to be a big person and I'm going to forgive them. Okay? And I spoke too quickly. I shouldn't say that that's easy, but it's relatively easier than this next part. It's easy to say, I was the one who's been wronged. I choose to forgive. Have you ever met somebody who chooses to be a victim all the time so that they don't have to face or own their own mistakes? I've been friends with those people. I've been that person. It's like, man, they're going to choose to be a victim in every area so they never have to admit that they're wrong. The only problem is this makes you a weak victim, and it doesn't allow you to grow. Being a victim in most areas is usually marked by somebody who says, and I hear this all the time, but Pastor, I didn't do anything wrong. Have you ever had people say that? I didn't do anything. And I hear it. I understand it. I've said it myself. But here's what that translates into. When you say, I didn't do anything wrong, you know what we're really saying in that? I'm pretty much perfect. I'm pretty much perfect, Pastor. Don't you understand? And listen. You might be a wonderful person, but that's just not true. You are not pretty much perfect. And people don't just do this with a few areas, okay? People who embrace this mentality, they do this in almost every area of their life. I didn't do anything wrong here. I didn't do anything wrong there. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. They walk around as victims, and that's not a fun thing. Strong people choose to own up to their mistakes. Here is the destruction. Here is my part. I'm going to rebuild. It might not be much, but there's always something that you can own. And I know. There's some of you in here who are still thinking in your mind, but seriously, I didn't do anything wrong. Okay? And I know that because I've been there, right? And I've also had many conversations with you and people like you, right? This is what it's like. I get it. But really, I didn't do anything wrong. If you really want freedom, find a sponsor, mentor, pastor, somebody you look up to spiritually, and say, here's the issue. Will you help me find my part, my role? And here's what's going to happen, is if the person is wise enough, they will tell you, here's your part. And here's the hard part. Here's the most difficult part. I've had people come to me and say, hey, I'm really looking to grow, and I want to know what my role is in this. And I'll say, oh, okay, well, here's your role. They'll say, no, here's why you're wrong, okay? But seriously, here's why that's not correct. Because what you don't understand is, see, what happened was, and it's like, no, you asked me, okay? If you go to somebody and you ask them, what is my role? You need to put aside defensiveness. And you need to say, whatever the next thing is that comes out of your mouth, I'm going to receive it. If it's somebody you trust, if it's somebody that's wise, you know they're wise. They're not wise in every situation but yours. They're wise. If they're wise, they're wise. You take it, you receive it, you say okay, right? Choosing to be a victim will always leave you enslaved, but owning your role and asking for forgiveness will set you free. Through this step, you will count the cost. You will prepare to rebuild your future, and you will move from victim to victor. It's a powerful, powerful step, which brings you to the next part. Because once you have prepared for all this, once you have laid the foundation for all this, you are ready to move on to step 9, which says we made a direct amends to such people wherever possible, except where to do so would injure them or others. An amends, they'll talk more about it, but an amends essentially means I'm making it right. It's not just saying, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? It's, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? Here's what I'm going to do to make it right. And this step, like the last one, does 3 major things. Number 1, it gives you skin in the game. Number 2, going public solidifies your freedom. And number 3, it helps you bring healing to those around you. I want you to understand, Jesus is pretty serious about this step. Okay? He actually tells us in Matthew 5:23 and 24, he goes, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come and offer your gift. What Jesus is saying here, he is saying, I don't want you to worship me until you have reconciled and fixed the situation, until you have made an amend. That's a pretty serious statement. He says, before you worship me, above worshiping me, I want you to fix these broken relationships because I'm not going to receive your worship until you do that. I know a lot of people who tell me, you know what, like I feel some connection to God, but I feel like there's this block in my life. And I would say, yeah, you're right. It's probably because you've harmed somebody and you need to go make it right. You need to make it right with them. That's what he tells us. Let's start going through these 3 points. The first one is it gives you skin in the game. Skin in the game. I've talked a little bit about this at the start of my talk, but buy-in is such a big deal. Okay? I know most people don't believe this, but I'm actually really kind of a free spirit, okay? And I didn't really understand how money worked when I was in 6th grade. I'd always tell my parents, Mom, Dad, everybody else gets everything. Why can't you buy me more stuff? Like, I just want more stuff, right? And admittedly, my parents, truly, they didn't get us a whole lot of stuff, but I wanted more, right? And I remember my mom and dad said, fine, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you an allowance. And what they did was they calculated monthly expenses for me, for clothes, for school fees, for uniforms, for sports, for lunches, and they just put it into one lump sum. They added like 10% on top of it, and they said, here you go, okay? Here's what you get each month. And I was like, sweet, okay? They were like, by the way, you should probably start an emergency fund. You should have savings. And I was like, whatevers. So I went to the movies. I bought candy. I blew it all on clothes. I lived month to month, and all of a sudden I had a growth spurt. I was in high waters, which are cool today, but not cool then, okay? So I'm walking around in high waters. People are making fun of me. I've got field trips. I'm like, I don't have any money for this field trip. I don't have enough money for lunches. I couldn't go on the field trips, right? I couldn't participate in some sporting events because I blew my money on all this stuff. Now, I had enough money for it. I just blew it. And all at once, I began to realize all that whining I'd been doing, it didn't make any sense, right? All of a sudden, I had skin in the game, and I understood why my parents weren't buying me that stuff. See, when you go to somebody and you say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, here's what I'm going to do to make it right, you're putting skin in the game. I've got a good friend. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's been sober for like 20 years. But when he was drinking, one night he got very drunk, and he got out his crossbow, and he shot it into a transformer in the city, right? And all of a sudden, pow, 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 you know, and all the power for the city of St. Paul just went out, mostly Shoreview. But yeah, he took out power for an entire region, right? It was an important transformer. And years later, when he was pursuing sobriety, he was long past the statute of limitations, he was talking with his sponsor, said, what should I do here? What do I do? Do I go to the mayor and say I'm sorry? And the guy just said, hey, you're going to go to City Hall, you're going to write a letter owning this, because you're past statute of limitations, he's not going to go to jail, you're going to volunteer to do 200 hours of community service. That's what he did to make it right. He did 200 hours of community service. Now, every time he thought about drinking, he realized, man, like, I've got skin in the game. I just gave 200 hours to make this right. I'm not going to drink because I have this skin in the game. I've got this motivation, right? That's what an amends looks like. I actually asked my wife to come out and talk a little bit about this process in her life. Come on out, Chrissy. Can we give it up for Kristen?
Awesome. Well, John asked me to give a couple examples so they can look real to you guys in your own life. And so when I was going through this process, there's two that really stuck out. And the first one was one that went really good. The second one was like what you probably should expect when you go and do this. But the first one was with my dad. See, when I was 15, I had become sexually active, and he found out. And this just gutted him. He was so disappointed. This is not the way he raised me. And he actually didn't speak to me for 2 months. He was so hurt. And when he did finally speak to me, we didn't talk about that. It's kind of like untouched. So when I was going through this process at 24, I realized that this is something that I really wanted to make right. So I remember this is how it looked. I just remember going to my dad and saying, I just need to apologize to you about something. I am so sorry that I had sex before marriage. Will you forgive me? And, it was just such a beautiful moment because I just almost saw this weight lifted off my dad, and he just embraced me and hugged me and said, the only reason I was upset was because I knew it was going to hurt you in the long run. And it just brought this whole new level of intimacy in this relationship and transparency with my dad that I wouldn't have. I mean, this was a barrier that had been between us for years. And the second one was with somebody in my life that had hurt me a lot through their decisions and actions. And I knew I had been holding unforgiveness and bitterness against them. So I went to them, and this is how this type looks. I didn't say I've been unforgiving. I said, will you forgive me for being bitter and angry at you for years? Because they felt it. They knew it. And, they said, yes, I do forgive you, but... And then they started adding all these things like, yeah, you were that. And also, you did this, and you did this, and you did this. And I just want to give this example because this is how you handle that. You listen, I owned it, and then I apologized for all the extra ways that I had hurt them. because that I had hurt them, and I needed to listen, and I needed to acknowledge, and I needed to own up to it. Because even though I may have been unaware, it hurt them, and they matter to God. And so, you know what? I never had a relationship with this person for years. And then my relationship with them is still not perfect, but I will say that God changed our relationship. Like, we have a relationship now. And the amends that I decided to make is I decided to pursue this person. Because I know a lot of times when there are people in our lives that have hurt us, our natural instinct is to run away, to avoid them. They hurt me. I'm not going to interact with them. But I felt God calling me. Because he did this with me. I want you to pursue them. I want you to love them. Doesn't mean I don't have boundaries with this person. But you know what? Regardless of what they do, it's a daily I forgive them. I forgive them. I forgive them. And this is our job. And if I can give you one piece of advice, this is a daily thing as Christians we do. But when we go and do this, people owe us nothing. When we go and apologize for our part, we go in knowing that they owe us nothing. Because you know what? Because of Jesus' death, we owe God nothing. And because of that truth, we get to go living our lives knowing and believing that every single person in our life owes us nothing. The debt is paid. So you know what? I can't imagine a better way for us as Christians to live out our faith and love God and love others than owning our sin, asking for forgiveness, and making it right. Like, we could change the world, church. This is the way we follow Jesus, and I just am so excited for us to embrace this.
Thanks, honey. I love that, and I love that she didn't go in expecting like a reciprocal apology, because I think so often we do that. But what Kristen did was she owned her sinfulness. Okay, she was getting skin in the game. If she wanted to modify her behavior and truly move on from who she was, this was a part of that process. And I love who she's becoming today, and I absolutely believe that it is built on the foundation that she laid through this process. Because you can't move past sin if you don't own it, if you don't have skin in the game, if you don't pick it up and say, I'm not going to be that person anymore. Not only does going through this step give you skin in the game, but I think that there's something about going public that solidifies our freedom. It solidifies our freedom. And what Kristen was doing was she was breaking the pattern, okay? The pattern of sin in her life. When you go to somebody, what you're doing is you're publicly saying, I'm not going to be that person anymore. I'm sorry, will you forgive me? And you're just telling them, I'm not going to be that person anymore. That's a break in the pattern. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting something to change, even though you are doing the same thing. Nothing's going to change. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. And what you do in this step is you are breaking patterns in your life. Okay? And this is more than just saying to yourself as you fall asleep, oh, that wasn't good. I'm never going to do that again. That doesn't stick. That's not a public declaration. When you publicly go to somebody, when you go to your mom or your dad and you say, hey, I'm sorry, or you go to your son or I'm sorry that I did this. Will you forgive me? That is a transformational experience. And it's a really big deal. I just want to give you an example that I think is something we need to hear about today. When you make an amend to somebody, by the way, it's not something that it's not like you say, hey, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? What can I do to make it right? That's not an amend. Okay? That puts a burden on them. They're going to feel obligated to say absolutely nothing. What you're going to do is you're going to decide with your sponsor ahead of time, hey, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? Here's what I'm going to do to make it right. Here's what I want to do for you to make it right. That's a real amend. But I just want to give you an example of something that a huge percentage of people in our society struggle with. Let's talk about making an amend for pornography just for a moment, okay? What you do, if you are using pornography in your house, you're in a relationship or something, and you want to get rid of this issue in your life, what you do, you'd work your steps up to this point. And when you get to this place, you'd go to your spouse, or if you're a teen, you'd go to your parents, and you'd confess to them, right? You'd say, I'm sorry that I've been doing this. I need to ask for your forgiveness. I want you to know here's the nature, the depth, the breadth, the frequency of what's been happening, okay? And then, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? Here's what I'm doing to make it right. I'm seeking counseling. Okay? I'd like to go with you to that counseling. And also, I'm placing blockers on all of my devices, or I'm getting rid of my devices, or I'm getting rid of my PlayStation, or whatever it might be, whatever your access point is. That's what an amend looks like, because what you're doing is you're building structures in your life so that you're not going to go back there. You're breaking the pattern of sin in your life. Okay? Going public solidifies. The last thing that happens is when you work this step, it helps bring healing to those around you. When the hurricane of your sin brings damage, these anchors are just spinning around and hitting people. Last week, I talked about the 4 anchors. I said there's a 5th anchor to get rid of. And this is where I'm going to talk about that 5th anchor. You see, as you hurt other people in your life, they end up getting bondage and baggage. They get anchors from you, okay? Your sin, your addiction, your issues begins hurting other people in your life. And what they're doing is they are dragging these anchors that you put there, okay? And through this step, what you do is you begin to bring healing to them. You say, hey, I'm so sorry that I did this. Please forgive me. Here's what I'm going to do to make it right. And what you're helping them do is you're helping them disconnect this anchor from their belt. And that benefits them. That helps bring healing to them. But here's what I want you to understand. This benefits you. Because when you hurt people in your life, you know what happens? Is they begin dragging these anchors around, and at the opportune time, when you're at your worst, they will take this anchor and they will beat you with it. Absolutely. I'm sure you've had that happen. Okay? You're a new person. You've been clean. You've been better. You've been free for years, but it's just the right opportunity. Remember when you did this? Wham! And they hit you with it, and it doesn't feel good, and it destroys, a part of you, and it's painful. In this process, you are removing somebody's ability to bring that hurt into your life. And what you're doing is you're helping them appropriate that to the cross of Christ as well. And that's where real freedom begins to happen. That's where real healing, that's where complete freedom really happens, is in that process. And it's powerful. It's powerful. I want to give you a few notes, though, on this step. It says, except where to do so. Except where to do so would cause harm to another person. I'll tell you, there's two caveats to this. I really say, don't go to people where it will cause harm. If there's somebody, you know that they're going to kill you. You knock on their door, and there's a shotgun to the face, okay? Maybe not. Maybe no bueno. Also, if you've abused somebody, sexually, physically, emotionally, I want you to think long and hard with your mentor, sponsor, whomever. You think really hard. Is going to them going to be a good idea? And if you think, man, this is going to cause more harm than good, this actually will. Not just you think that, but your mentor hears a situation, says, yeah, I think that's bad. What you would do is you would write a letter, okay? You'd write a letter to that person, and I wouldn't even make contact. I would just write the letter out. Here's what I did. Here's how it affected you. I'm sorry. And then I would still do an amend. Here's what I'm going to do to make it right. Let's say you neglected and maybe abused a child in your life for a long time, okay? And you can't go to that child. What I would do is I'd say, you know what? I'm going to make it up to the city. I'm going to be a big brother. I'll tutor at the school. I'll do something. I'm going to make an amend. And I can't do it to them, but I'm going to do an amend so that I remember this, right? And you make that amend, and then you burn that letter. That's what you do. And also, another caveat, if you are in a relationship and there is an ex that you want to make an amend to, you're married, you've got an ex from your past, do not, without the express, joyful, and complete blessing from your spouse, go to that person. My wife, in her process, she said, hey, I've got some exes in my life I'd like to make an amends to. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not comfortable with that. I love you too much. And I know how sweet you are. And if you go to them and they see all the things that God is doing, they're going to want you back too. I don't want it. And so she didn't. She didn't. And that's okay. I'm not a bad person for doing that. I'm glad that I did that. I still stand by that decision. And so what she did was she wrote a letter to them. And she made an amends in her own way, and she burned those letters. I want you to know these steps are powerful. And I acknowledge that this is a lot. Going through these steps, it is a big process in our life. And I want you to understand that's why it's steps. You don't have to do all this at once. If you hear this and you're intimidated by it, well, praise God that you don't have to take it all at once. It's one day, one step at a time. And I'll tell you what, steps 8 and 9 in particular are really daunting. But what I love about it, there's some of you say, well, I could never do that. And I'd say, you're absolutely right. You cannot do that. That's why step 1 is admitting that you're powerless over these things. That's why step 2 is believing that Jesus has the power. And that's why step 3 is asking him to give you that power, right? And so if you're here today, you're saying, oh man, I can't do steps 8 and 9. You're absolutely right, you can't. Go back to steps 1 through 3 and allow Jesus to equip you with what he can so that you can do it. Alcoholics Anonymous has found that people who make a list and ask for forgiveness are far more likely to remain sober and free because they are publicly and personally investing in that life change. This is meaningful and this works. As we close, I want to challenge our church to continue in this process. I want to challenge our church to continue audaciously moving forward. There is freedom, friends. Next week is the final week of this series, and we have got some really cool sustainment things that I want to talk about next week. But this week, I want you to focus on steps 8 and 9. I want to challenge you not just to, oh, that was a good message. I want to challenge you to say, I am going to do this. I want this in my life. So many of you have shared with us, man, I did the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and 7th step, and there's so much freedom in it. Why stop there? I want to ask us to stand as we get ready to close. We're going to close worshiping the Lord through a song. Listen, you make your lists, you make your amends, And here's the part I really love about completing step 9. Last week, we talked about those 4 anchors. This week, we added that last anchor, okay? And you've got a series of 5 lists. We've got guilt, we've got fear, resentment, sexual misconduct, and people that we have hurt. And when you complete step 9, this is the best part, okay? When you're done with step 9, you take those lists and you destroy them because you're not that person anymore. You don't have to carry those anymore. God is finished with those. It's over. He took those things to the pit of hell for you. Here's the thing. In church, we do something that kind of symbolizes this process happening. It's called baptism and profession, okay? Baptism and profession is sort of the outward sign of the inward change of what's happened in our life. And I know there's a lot of you here today. I've heard this a lot from people who come to our church. They say, I like your church, but I saw somebody there who's just a horrible person, okay? They're just a terrible person. They ream me out at Tyson's, they overcharge me for a plumbing thing. I can't go there because that hypocrite goes there. And this is what we say at First Church. We say, no one's perfect and everyone's welcome. You're absolutely right. There are all kinds of people who have issues in their life who come to church because you don't have to be perfect to go here. But we have this other statement that's for you, that's a blessing for you, and it says this. It says, growing people change. See, in Christ, growing people change. And you might see somebody who did you wrong last month, last year, or last decade. But guess what? In Christ, they might not be that person anymore. Because Jesus heals. Jesus can change us. In Christ, we can grow. And when we go public, with our faith, through profession and baptism, what we're saying is, I am not that person anymore. I may have wronged you. I may have hurt you. I may not have been the best, but today I'm declaring that I'm something new in Christ Jesus. When we are immersed, it is symbolic of our old self passing away. And when we emerge from the water, it is symbolic of rising again with Jesus as something new and different through His power, as something brand new. Jesus looks at us and He says, it is finished. It is done. It is complete. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, this means that anyone in Christ is a new creation. The old life is gone. The new life has come. In Christ, you can be brand new. Our past may have been bad, but our future is great because of Jesus. And as a church, I want to lift you up in prayer. I want to pray as we close. Jesus, we know that you are about healing our past and giving us a future. We ask that you would give us a new everyday purpose, a new everyday freedom, hope for tomorrow, contentment and satisfaction for today, real and lasting intimacy, healed relationships. Jesus, we ask that you would transform the generations from father to son, from mother to daughter, from brother to sister, and from husband to wife. We ask that you would bring hope, healing, freedom, discipleship, courage, and growth, because in you can change and heal all things. In the name of Jesus, we ask and pray these things.